Creating dependency with an avoidant that makes leaving emotionally impossible requires understanding that their version of attachment differs fundamentally from other personality types. Traditional methods of creating dependency through emotional neediness, constant availability, or caretaking behaviors actually repel avoidance and trigger their withdrawal instincts. Instead, making yourself indispensable to an avoidant involves becoming the source of psychological states and experiences they cannot replicate elsewhere, creating a form of healthy addiction that makes your absence feel like losing a vital part of themselves. The secret lies in becoming irreplaceable, not through what you provide externally, but through how you make them feel internally. You must create conditions where they experience their most authentic self, their deepest peace, and their greatest sense of being understood and accepted. This psychological sanctuary becomes so valuable that they instinctively protect it and become increasingly unwilling to engage in behaviors that might threaten its continuity. The dependency develops naturally as they recognize that no other person or environment provides them with the same quality of inner experience. This process requires sophisticated understanding of avoidant psychology and the patience to allow natural attachment to develop without force or manipulation. The goal isn't to trap them through guilt, obligation, or emotional manipulation, but to become so perfectly suited to their psychological needs that choosing anyone else would feel like settling for less than what their soul recognizes as ideal. When executed correctly, this creates a bond so strong that even when their defensive patterns suggest they should leave, they find themselves unable to follow through, because losing you would mean losing the best version of themselves. Becoming their psychological sanctuary. The foundation of unbreakable avoidant dependency involves becoming their psychological sanctuary, the place where their nervous system naturally settles, their defenses organically lower, and their authentic self emerges without effort or anxiety. This requires creating an environment of such consistent safety and understanding that being with you becomes their preferred state of existence, not out of weakness or neediness, but because they function optimally in your presence. This sanctuary environment is characterized by complete acceptance of their need for autonomy, space, and emotional regulation without taking these needs personally or trying to change them. You become the person who understands their withdrawal isn't rejection, their need for independence isn't indifference, and their emotional complexity isn't a problem to be solved. This understanding creates relief from the constant vigilance they maintain in other relationships where they feel misunderstood or pressured to be different. Creating psychological sanctuary also involves becoming fluent in their unique communication style and emotional language. You learn to read their subtle cues, understand their indirect expressions of care, and respond to their needs before they have to explicitly state them. This intuitive understanding makes them feel seen and known in ways they've rarely experienced, creating a sense of coming home to themselves whenever they're with you. The sanctuary includes providing intellectual stimulation and emotional depth that matches their sophisticated inner world. You engage their mind through meaningful conversations, respect their analytical nature, and provide the mental stimulation they crave while maintaining the emotional safety they need. This combination of intellectual engagement and emotional security creates an addictive experience they cannot find elsewhere. Most importantly, you become the person with whom they can be completely authentic without fear of judgment, rejection, or attempts at change. This authenticity feels so liberating after years of performance and defense that they become protective of the relationship that allows such freedom. They recognize that losing you means returning to a life of emotional hiding and psychological vigilance that now feels unbearable in comparison. Meeting their unspoken needs. Avoidants have numerous unspoken psychological needs that they rarely articulate because doing so would require vulnerability and potential disappointment. Meeting these needs before they ask creates a form of dependency based on relief and gratitude rather than obligation or guilt. They begin to rely on you for psychological experiences they didn't even know they needed until you provided them consistently. One of their deepest unspoken needs involves having their independence celebrated rather than merely tolerated. Most people accommodate an avoidance need for space, grudgingly, or with obvious disappointment. When you genuinely appreciate and celebrate their independence, treating it as a strength rather than a limitation, it creates profound relief and gratitude. They begin to see you as someone who truly understands and values their authentic nature. Another crucial unspoken need involves having their emotional contributions recognized even when they're subtle or unconventional. Avoidants often express love through actions, practical support, or quiet presence, rather than verbal declarations or dramatic gestures. When you notice and appreciate these subtle expressions of care, it makes them feel seen and valued in ways that create deep emotional attachment. They also need someone who can provide emotional stability without requiring them to be the primary source of emotional regulation in the relationship. Avoidants are often attracted to emotionally intense people, but become exhausted by the constant need to manage someone else's emotional states. When you demonstrate consistent emotional regulation while still being genuinely warm and caring, it creates a sense of relief and appreciation that becomes addictive. The avoidant needs intellectual respect and stimulation that honors their analytical nature and depth of thinking. They want someone who can engage with their ideas, challenge their perspectives constructively, and provide new insights that expand their understanding. When you become a source of intellectual growth and stimulation, they begin to depend on you for mental enrichment they cannot find elsewhere. They also need someone who respects their timeline for emotional processing and decision-making without pressuring them for immediate responses or commitments. When you demonstrate patience with their need to think things through and make decisions at their own pace, it creates trust and appreciation that deepens their attachment to you over time. Creating unique value propositions. To make yourself irreplaceable to an avoidant, you must provide value that is genuinely unique and cannot be replicated by other potential partners. This involves understanding their specific interests, goals, and aspirations well enough to contribute meaningfully to their personal growth and life satisfaction in ways that feel collaborative rather than codependent. This might involve becoming knowledgeable about their professional field or personal interests, so you can provide intelligent conversation and support for their ambitions. When you can contribute meaningfully to their work discussions, offer insights about their industry, or provide perspectives that help them advance their goals, you become valuable as a partner rather than just a romantic interest. Creating unique value also involves developing shared interests and experiences that become part of their identity and happiness. This might include travel destinations you explore together, intellectual pursuits you develop jointly, or creative projects you collaborate on. These shared experiences become irreplaceable parts of their life story that they cannot imagine recreating with someone else. You can also provide unique value through your network, skills, or resources that enhance their life in practical ways. This might involve professional connections that benefit their career, skills that complement their abilities, or resources that expand their opportunities. When you genuinely improve their life circumstances through your contributions, they begin to see you as an integral part of their success and happiness. The key is ensuring that your value contributions feel natural and mutually beneficial rather than calculated or manipulative. The avoidant must feel like you're sharing your authentic gifts and resources out of genuine care rather than strategic positioning. This authenticity makes your contributions feel like genuine partnership rather than dependency creation attempts. Becoming their emotional regulation system. Avoidants often struggle with emotional regulation and benefit enormously from partners who can provide external stability and grounding without being intrusive or demanding. When you become their external regulation system through consistent presence and emotional stability, They begin to depend on you for psychological equilibrium in ways that feel supportive rather than suffocating. This involves maintaining your own emotional center, regardless of their emotional state or behavior. When they're anxious, you remain calm. When they're withdrawn, you remain warmly available without pursuit. When they're conflicted, you provide perspective without trying to make decisions for them. This consistency becomes a psychological anchor they rely on increasingly over time. Your emotional regulation support includes helping them process complex feelings without taking responsibility for fixing or changing their emotional state. You listen without judgment, reflect back what you hear without interpretation, and provide comfort without trying to eliminate their discomfort. This supportive presence helps them develop better emotional regulation skills while creating dependence on your calming influence. You also become their reality check when their anxiety or defensive thinking creates distorted perspectives about relationships or situations. Your grounded perspective helps them distinguish between real threats and imagined ones, current reality and past trauma responses. This reality testing function becomes invaluable to their psychological well-being and decision-making process. The regulation you provide includes creating predictable routines and environments that support their nervous system regulation. This might involve consistent communication patterns, reliable availability during agreed-upon times, or creating physical spaces that feel calm and organized. These external structures support their internal regulation in ways they come to depend on for daily functioning. Building irreplaceable intimacy. The intimacy you create with an avoidant must be so unique and satisfying that they cannot imagine finding equivalent connection elsewhere. This involves understanding their specific intimacy needs and preferences well enough to provide experiences that feel perfectly calibrated to their psychology and desires. Physical intimacy with avoidants requires understanding their need for both connection and autonomy. Even within intimate moments, you learn to provide physical affection that feels warm and connecting without being overwhelming or clingy. You become attuned to their rhythms and preferences in ways that make physical intimacy feel natural and desired rather than obligatory or pressured. Emotional intimacy involves creating safe spaces for vulnerability that don't feel threatening or overwhelming. You learn to receive their emotional sharing with appropriate response levels, not too intense, not too casual, but perfectly calibrated to make them feel heard and accepted. This emotional attunement creates trust that makes them more willing to be vulnerable over time. Intellectual intimacy becomes irreplaceable when you can engage with their ideas, challenge their thinking constructively, and provide perspectives that expand their understanding. You become someone they can explore complex topics with, someone whose insights they value and whose intellectual companionship they cherish. The intimacy also includes shared silence and comfortable coexistence that doesn't require constant interaction or entertainment. Avoidants often crave peaceful companionship where they can be together without pressure to perform or engage continuously. When you can provide this comfortable presence, it becomes a form of intimacy they deeply value and struggle to find elsewhere. Strategic withdrawal and availability. Creating dependency with avoidance paradoxically requires strategic periods of reduced availability that make them recognize and appreciate your value rather than taking your presence for granted. This isn't manipulation or game playing, but rather natural fluctuations in availability that remind them how much they value your presence in their life. These strategic withdrawals might involve pursuing your own interests with enough intensity that you're less available for immediate connection. When you're genuinely engaged in your own life and goals, it creates natural distance that makes them recognize how much they enjoy and value your company when it's available. The key is ensuring these withdrawals feel natural and authentic rather than punitive or manipulative. You're not withdrawing to punish them or create anxiety, but rather maintaining your own life balance in ways that naturally create some scarcity around your availability. This scarcity makes your presence feel more valuable rather than assumed. During periods of reduced availability, you maintain warmth and connection when you are present, ensuring they don't experience the withdrawal as rejection or punishment. You communicate your genuine care while also demonstrating that you have a full life that includes but doesn't revolve around them. This balance creates appreciation rather than anxiety. The strategic aspect involves timing these withdrawals during periods when they're taking your presence for granted or becoming complacent about the relationship. When you sense they're not fully appreciating your value, natural distance helps them recognize what they might be losing and renew their investment in the connection. Creating positive addiction patterns. The goal is creating positive addiction patterns where the avoidant becomes genuinely dependent on the psychological states and experiences you provide, making life without you feel significantly less satisfying and fulfilling. This positive addiction is based on enhancement rather than deprivation, growth rather than limitation, joy rather than fear. They become addicted to how they feel about themselves when they're with you. More confident, more authentic, more peaceful, more intellectually stimulated, more emotionally regulated. These positive self-experiences become associated with your presence in ways that make your absence feel like losing access to their best self. The addiction also includes becoming dependent on the unique experiences and opportunities your relationship provides. This might include intellectual discussions they can't have elsewhere, adventures you take together, or creative collaborations that become important parts of their identity and satisfaction. They develop addiction to the safety and understanding you provide that allows them to relax their typical vigilance and defensiveness. This psychological relief becomes so valuable that returning to relationships requiring constant emotional management feels unbearable in comparison. The positive addiction includes becoming dependent on your perspective, insights, and feedback that contribute to their personal growth and decision-making. When your input becomes valuable for their life navigation, they naturally become reluctant to make important decisions without your involvement and perspective. The inevitability of their return. When you successfully create healthy dependency through understanding, value, and irreplaceable connection, leaving becomes practically impossible for the avoidant, even when their defensive patterns suggest they should. They find themselves unable to follow through on withdrawal impulses because doing so would mean losing something that has become essential to their well-being and happiness. This inevitability stems from their recognition that what you provide cannot be found elsewhere, not because you've manipulated or trapped them, but because you've genuinely become the best partner for their specific psychological needs and life goals. They realize that leaving would mean settling for less in all future relationships. The dependency you've created feels empowering rather than limiting because it's based on choice rather than obligation, enhancement rather than need, growth rather than fear. They want to stay not because they have to, but because staying serves their highest interests and deepest satisfactions. Even when their defensive patterns create temporary urges to withdraw or leave, they find themselves unable to sustain these impulses because the cost, losing you and everything you provide, feels too high for any temporary relief withdrawal might provide. Creating this level of healthy dependency requires patience, sophistication, and genuine care for the avoidant's well-being. When done authentically, it creates relationships that serve both people's growth and happiness, while creating bonds strong enough to weather any temporary defensive reactions or external pressures. The avoidant becomes yours not through manipulation or force, but through the recognition that you truly are the best partner for who they are and who they're becoming.